Hi, it's Mark from Go Fast Hobbies and Raceway, here with you on Tech Tip Tuesday. Today we're going to go over how to assemble a GFRP transmission with a ball differential. I will break down the ball differential, how I assemble it, and all these practices that I can use can be used with like the customer's transmission, the associated transmission as well, and all their components. We'll go over all that in the video. So let's get started. Welcome to Tech Tip Tuesday with Mark. Today we're going to go over the transmission assembly in a Team GFRP Assault Assailant. I'll go over what each individual piece is. We've had a lot of questions about what kind of internals the diff takes, where can I buy rebuild kits, questions like that, and etc. So the basic transmission kit that comes in the car kit is the GFRP 1193. You can use the associated ball differential kit, and then the rebuild kit would be this rebuild kit from Associated, which comes with the rings, the springs, etc. Also, their diff balls and the caged assembly is an associated part as well. Also optional for running on higher bite tracks, you can use the Associated gear diff kit, and that is a plastic case. You can also, Team GFRP makes a really nice aluminum case assembly, which is a 2045. Also, when we build this transmission kit, I'll be using the transmission gear lube that they sell as well as their shim kit. You see the CustomWorks transmission version 2 sitting here as well. All this stuff that I'm going to go over can be applied to this transmission as well. And the diff assemblies are exchangeable between the two transmissions. So let's get started. I've already got the transition bag apart here. Pull the ball diff kit out of the bag. Kind of go over it. Just make sure we've got all the parts here. Looks like we do. We've got all the bearings, either gear, either shaft, top shaft, and the diff assembly is here. So we're going to start by cutting open the transmission diff assembly here. That dries out. Get everything out here. Lay everything out. It's kind of how I do things. Bearings out. I try to keep all of the differential stuff separate from the actual transmission itself when I do this. Pull the cage out. Make sure the cage is all there. It's all there. Bags in this bag here. So, this is what I like to do. Is I open these up, cut this off here. So do that. The reason I do that is I'm going to dump the diff balls out into this grease assembly so the diff balls don't run away. Pull the rings out, grab those, dump this in here gently. Get it all in there. So, got all of our parts out. Now what I like to do is take these rings, pretty shiny. What I do is take a little bit of WD-40, take a piece of 600 grit sandpaper, spray a little bit of WD-40 on it, and then we'll start to sand the rings. Just kind of knocks off the edges, gives the balls something to bite to. Do it in a figure 8 pattern. See where we're at here. You always want to have a piece of paper towel handy as well. Wipe everything off. Ring looks like it's sanded fairly even. So we're going to call that one good. Clean the outdrive off, repeat the process. You always want to make sure you have a flat surface to sand on as well. I'm using a piece of glass. You don't want the surface to be uneven because then it'll sand the ring uneven, and then you'll have one side of the ring sanded and not the other side. So, basic stuff. So, pop this ring off, see how it looks. Looks pretty good. I'd say that one's good too. Now, Associated does sell the rings pre-sanded. So you can get them pre-sanded, so you don't have to go through that step if you don't want to do that. So what I usually do is I start with putting the thrust assembly together. Just use a wrench, a bit of grease on the wrench. Make sure when you put the cage together, the groove ring down. That, put some grease on it. You also assemble it, put the cage. Putting the cage together. Make sure you get plenty of grease on it so it doesn't go dry. If it goes dry, it'll burn up, have problems. Grab the other ring, slide it down there. Gets kind of messy. And what I do is make sure you got plenty of grease on there. Make sure it's packed in there really good. And the assembly. Gonna slide it into the female side. Just like that. Pull it down. Use a pair of scissors, you can use an X-Acto knife, however you want to do it. Trim off the... Slide that down the diff tube. Use the ring usually is how I do it. Sure that's in there, that's done. So go over here to the male side. Trim that off. So grab the spring, and then what I always do is take a pair of pliers, squeeze the spring, press the spring all the way, that way the spring is compressed. So that way when you go to adjust the diff, the spring has already been compressed to its fullest. That way it won't back off, it won't do anything goofy. Slide that in there like that. Now you gotta be careful because that kind of moved back and forth in there, so just make sure you watch that when you're going to assemble it. Next step is I coat the outdrives with grease to give the ring something to adhere to. Kind of help hold the ring in place. You always want to make sure you put the sanded side up. Repeat the process. So you got to watch that. It likes to move around. So you get plenty of grease on there. Ring on there, always kind of turn it to make sure it sets on there. Go back over and grease the top of it. Now, fun part. Always make sure the bearings fit nice and freely in there. You want them to move nice and free. You don't want them to bind up. Sometimes you have to take an X-Acto knife or a reamer and ream that out. The Associated discs of late have been really nice. Everything fits together really good with them. So again, I grab the second bearing, put that in there. I always hold on to this, flip it up. Majority of the time these will come right out of there, fall right into the gear assembly. right out of the cap. Won't be stubborn. Get a few of them that want to be stubborn. That's all right. We'll get it. Big deal. Just kind of work them around. So I've got 3 left. Alright, so we got everything in there, got all of our grease. I'm going to slide the out dries together. Careful here. Grab the wrench. I'm going to tighten her up. I just gently tighten it all the way up, back it off about 1/8 of a turn, roll it back and forth. Make sure it moves free, which it should. Let everything kind of set. Some guys will run these in a drill, you know, with the out drive, spin it. I pretty much just kind of run it across the towel a little bit here, to kind of help break it in a little bit on both sides. Nothing too extreme. I'll tighten it all the way up and back it off about 1/8 of a turn. Kind of helps set it. Sets the ball, sets the rings. The big thing is once you compress that spring before you put it together, that helps a lot with the compression of it. It won't back off, it won't do goofy things. Like when you go running, a lot of guys I know, they haven't built a lot of ball diffs, will go out and run and say the diff spun loose. Well, majority of the time the reason that does that is because the spring is not compressed all the way. You do that with a pair of pliers before you put it together, and it'll eliminate a lot of the issues you'll have. So, just wipe off the excess grease with a towel. So, now that that's built, close up our tubs here. Set those off to the side. Grab the top shafts, unthread the screw out here. Now this is a metric screw. The rest of this transmission is standard screws, so you want to make sure you set that aside and don't get it mixed up with the regular transmission. Now, the adjustment side of this, just this side right here, always goes on the spur gear side. It never goes on the left side, it always goes on the right side. Sure, it goes on the right hand, right side, spur gear, when you're looking at the back of the car, it goes on there. So, I always set it like that. That way I know that's how it's built. Okay, so we'll go ahead. What I usually do is put the bearings in the transmission. Once again, side spur gears on, put this in there, just like that. That way you know it goes in there, set it just like that. I will put the bearings in the idler gear. We'll grab this transmission gear lube and we will put a little bit of gear lube on this. Just a little bit, just to lubricate it. Nothing too major. Close that up. Put the idler shaft in. So as we put the idler gear in the transmission, you always want to make sure that when you take the transmission apart to rebuild it, especially if you disassemble a diff, that you mark the diff gear and you mark the idler gear. So you get them back in the right direction because the teeth will wear on them. And if you don't get them in the right direction, you always hear, man, that guy's car is really loud. 9 times out of 10, it's because he's taken the transmission apart and didn't mark the diff gear and the idler gear, and one of them's flopped. So it's wore, so that's why the car's really loud. That obviously can happen with the spur gear as well. If you take the spur gear off the car and you don't mark which side is the outside of the spur gear and which side is the inside of the spur gear, you put it on, flip it around, go out and run the car, it's really loud. That also can be a cause of the car being really loud. So next, we'll go ahead and we'll put the top shaft in, put the bearings on the top shafts, what I like to do. Obviously, I'm putting this together without shims. You can put shims in it if needed. Majority of the transmissions, especially with the ball diff, are pretty good. They don't have a lot of play in them. The top shaft's fairly tight, and this is the diff's fairly tight in there. Just want to make sure you roll it over and make sure she's rolling free. I've noticed with the gear diff, putting the gear diff assemblies in a transmission, I would recommend getting a shim kit. It seems that the diff has more side play in it. The top shaft seems to be pretty good on all the latest transmissions I've put together. So we'll go on ahead and we will screw the transmission together. Just want to make sure that you don't over tighten these screws. Just tighten them up, just snug them up. Make sure everything still rolls freely, which it does. Screw the motor plate on. Maybe. Once again, you don't want to tighten the screws up, but you don't want to over tighten them. You don't want to like crank them down crazy tight. Just get them tight. Now on the aluminum transmission case, if you're running an aluminum transmission case, I would recommend using blue Loctite on the screws just because they will back out if you don't do that. The plastic case kind of acts like Loctite, so make sure you put your slipper shaft on. It goes on this way. Push it all the way down. Once again, metric screw. Also recommend putting some blue Loctite on this. Just putting this together to show you guys to make sure that spur gear adapter doesn't fall off. Alright, so now we've got the transmission completely assembled. It's ready to go in the car. Obviously, you want to make sure adjustment is on this side. Got to be on this side. Very crucial. If it's on this side, it will keep backing out and you won't be able to run the car more than probably maybe 30 seconds. All right, so we're gonna, got the transmission assembled. We're gonna put the spur gear on it before we put it in the car. Pop her out. Put her on there. I always put it with it's an 84 tooth. I always put that with to the outside. So that way when I know if I take the spur gear off, that's the direction it goes back on. We'll tighten her up. And with the spur gear on, you can tighten this down much tighter. Still recommend using blue Loctite though. So everything spins nice and free. Gear's really true. We'll put the top brace on. Once again, you don't want to over tighten these screws because it can break the transmission case, crack it. Just want to get them snugged up. So I'll grab the car. I've already pre-assembled the car. I'll go ahead and slip the transmission in. Always put the dog bones in. It can be kind of tricky. Get these all in there, but they go right in there. Getting it lined up. Now I've left the rear shock tower loose on the car. I'll explain that here in a second why I did that. Go ahead and we will put these screws in here. Lined up. I see the shock tower's moving around quite a bit. up here. So again, tighten them up, snug them up. We'll grab 2 screws that go in the bottom, flip the car over, and we'll put the screws in the bottom of the transmission. This car is set up to run short wheelbase. Tighten them up. Grab the second one here, flip it back over, back in here. Now, the reason I left the rear shock tower loose when I assembled, put the transmission in it, so go ahead and tighten that up now. What can happen is it makes it really difficult to get the transmission lined up in the back of the car. It can bind the car up. The chassis plate can cause the car to be inconsistent. I found it best over all my years of racing that I always leave the rear shock tower screws on the bottom loose, bolt the transmission down first, and then tighten the rear shock tower up. Seems to help with the binding of the back of the car, make sure everything gets in there straight. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and sticking it out through the video. Hopefully this helps you guys with your ball diff assembly and transmission assembly. Hopefully were some helpful hints there for you guys. And like and subscribe, and make sure you check us out again next Tuesday. I'll see you there. Hi everyone, welcome to hopefully this is helpful for all you. Welcome to Tech.